work with Director Keenan a lot, and over the years have written many, many laws with him, and I work with him throughout the year, 365 days a year on different issues, whether it's child sex trafficking or it's abuse of the elderly. I could go on and on and on the issues that we worked on together. And he said, Renee, it's the holiday season, and I have to get to Gwinnett County. And I said, well, why do you have to get to Gwinnett County? You know, he lives on the other side of town. He said, Gwinnett County has the largest school system in the state, and we are seeing an uptick in child suicides. And I want to target the largest school system in the state because I think that we can reach more people. And if we can save just one child's life, I know it's Thanksgiving, I know it's the football, I know it's everything, and I certainly don't want to drive to Gwinnett County on a Friday night in Gwinnett County traffic from the state capitol. And I said, no, you don't, but I'm going to put it together. And we put it together really quickly, but what was different about it is it was a collaboration. We had the school board here, we had the community service board here, which is the provider of behavioral health services. We had a whole plethora. We had the Latino community, we had a lot of diversity, and believe it or not, on a Friday night, we had more people that are in this room. And it's because people care about suicide and about saving that one life that potentially we can save. And I have to say that John is a very, very good speaker. And I'm a pretty good speaker too. I've been elected like Louise Radloff. She and I are some of the old matriarchs of Gwinnett County. And I've been elected almost 30 years now. And I can talk very good on the Senate floor about a lot of different issues. And I get put on the Senate floor just to do that. I argue with some of the best attorneys, trial attorneys. I'm a nurse and a social worker, but I can argue the horns off a billy goat. And they put me down there to do just that. But let me tell you what I can't talk about and what I haven't been able to talk about. And only recently did I go to the Senate floor this past year and had tears streaming down my face talking about suicide. Because just like John, unfortunately, I'm in a club that's not a very good club to be in. My son also killed himself, and he was young, and it happened in 2009. And I start shaking when I start talking about it. And that's a mother's normal reaction. Would you like to have a mother come up here that didn't have those same feelings, even though it's years ago? And even if it's an adult, it's still a child in your eyes. It's still your son. You remember when he was born. You remember every milestone. And I think the reason the urgency of Vernon Keenan, the director of the GBI, was it was the holiday season. And I know from suffering and grieving what I've been through that the holidays are the worst period. And if I learned also from Vernon Keenan, if one child is in a family, that other children in that same family are also susceptible to ideations of suicide and have a tendency to also be the next victim. So I can understand and I appreciate, and I came from an all-star family too. I didn't play baseball. I played basketball at Burtmore High School, but I came from an all-star family too. It was a family of a state senator. I'm on the front page of the newspaper. I'm on the TV. Oh my gosh, is my son going to put me through this? My ex-husband was a physician. This is a nurse and a doctor. Of all people who could see those traits and those tendencies of mental illness, do you not think that it would be a mother who is a nurse and a social worker? I came home from the state capitol on a Friday, early in 2009, and I hate to even talk about it, but I get my courage from you because you were able to talk about it. I came home because I was meeting the man who was putting in one of those invisible fences for the dogs, right? And I had to come home early from the Capitol on a Friday, And I came home, and I came in, and I noticed the TV was on. I noticed there was food on the table, and I noticed the lights were on, but it was broad daylight. There was no reason for the lights to be on. And I called out for my son, Zach. Zach, where are you? The man's going to be here. I got to pay the man for the dog fencing. And I started looking around, and Zach wasn't there. Zach was gone. So I started looking. I went upstairs, went in his bedroom, and I knew there was some mother's intuition. I knew that something was drastically wrong. And I walked down the steps of the deck to the pool, and there was Zach. And my life was changed forever, just as yours was changed forever. So it's not a good story to tell, but guess what? There's hope. There's hope because there's prevention, there's education, and there's treatment. And because you're here tonight and you're saving one life, if you save just one life, just one Zach, just one Will, imagine that contribution to society. Imagine if those two boys were still alive. It's an incredible journey that we're taking away. And what Vernon Keenan taught me and what I learned, and I'm going to go over these statistics, and I know I've only got a few minutes, but what he taught me is that kids that are 5 years old are committing suicide. And you say, how can a child that's 5 and 6 and 7 years old commit suicide? It must be an accident. They're playing with a gun. No, it's intentional. It's intentional. This is what they want. This is what they do. And it's something that we have to acknowledge. And the stigmatization, the stigma of me walking down the steps at the Capitol, of me walking through the halls, and people can see that I'm absolutely disturbed, but they can't come up to me and say, Renee, you must be thinking about Zach. Renee, I know you're having a hard day. The family at the Capitol is very tight, but yet that same family couldn't look in my eyes and say, Renee, it's terrible that your son committed suicide. But yet they could say, Renee, it's terrible that your son died on 3/16 in a traffic accident. I'm sorry. I know you miss him. But suicide has that stigmatization, and that's one of the things that you talked about that we have to remove. So in 2009, for the first time ever, the state budget had a line item created for suicide education for the first time ever. Can you imagine? 2009 was the first time that money had been put in the budget to be able to help families and to do that education. That line item is still in the budget, and we add money to the budget. Did we do a good job? No. Look at this room. This room holds 500 people. I used to be a county commissioner sitting right there. This room should be filled up. When you think about those statistics about how many people are dying every day from suicide, this room needs to be filled up. So the state has a child fatality review board, and I wish every one of y'all could have been here last week, because that review board, her name is Trevor Randall, and she works in the GBI, in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and she is an investigator. She has the sad job of going all over the state and investigating why children die. This is from birth to 18 years old. So she also investigates things like SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, when babies die and you don't know why, or they die sleeping with their parents. So she has a very tough job, and she came last week and talked about what kids die from and why kids die. And they were exactly some of the same things that you talked about. And just like your son, you had no warning. I had no warning. Kids, evidently, from what they said at the meeting last week, is multiple sources. There's a lot going on the internet, but you can't blame the internet wholly. They learn a lot of different things on the internet, but that's not the main contributor. What she said is a lot of different things happening, just like you talked about, and that pressure. and that pressure mounts and mounts and mounts. But unfortunately, it's mounting at a younger and younger age, and that's what the statistics show. So I'm going to read some of these. She put these on the chart, up on the video, but I didn't have time to get them up here. But I wanted to show you the comparison in the state of Georgia, and the reason we need to be alarmed is because the 5-year statistics are growing rapidly. The year over year and the cumulative effect in the lower age is growing. In 2012, there were 32 child suicide deaths. 24 were from the age 15 to 17, and 7 were from the years 10 through 14 years old. And 1 in 2012 was 5 to 9 years old. Let's fast forward. I'm not going to go through the whole chart here. To the year 2016, 34 fatalities of children that were 15 to 17 years old, and 13 that were 10 to 14 years old, and 1 that was 5 to 9 years old, and I believe that one was the 5-year-old. So when they talked to me this year, by the time Trevor had talked to me in 1 week, she called me the next weekend and she said, Renee, we've had 2 fatalities. One was in South Georgia and one was in Northwest Georgia. And I think now you understand why. In the month of October for 2017, we had already had 38 fatalities. So we're on record for November and December to increase over the year to date. Trevor does a very good job. When you look at these investigations, they're thorough investigations of figuring out why, what happened. And the most important thing is letting the families know what happened and why they think it happened. So I'm going to close out. I'm going to say, what is the state doing? The number one job I do, and I think Louise Radloff will testify to this, is that I lobby my colleagues every single day, 365 days a year, for mental health parity, that just as much money is put into the state budget for physical health as for mental health. It's a hard road to toe because mental health does have that stigmatization. We also have 4 federal lawsuits that the state has been under that mandates that certain amounts of money. I write the budget for behavioral health, and hundreds of millions of dollars go into that budget, but unfortunately we're told by the federal government where that money has to go and not necessarily targeted state-specific of where I want to be able to put that money. So it's a very difficult task. This next year we're going to be targeting children that are 0 to 4 years old. And I had the newspaper say, Renee, why are you targeting babies? Because we feel like an early diagnosis and treatment at a very early age, that by the time you get to high school and that middle school age where they're the most vulnerable, that you'll already be on track and you give them treatment, therapeutic services before they're so desperate for services. And from a taxpayer viewpoint, we feel like that actually saves money and hopefully will save lives. The other thing that we have been working on, I've had the pleasure of working with the rest of the speakers here, is substance abuse. Because substance abuse, when you talk to the GBI, you see the intertwining the cultural, social ills of the heroin and the opioid epidemic, and you say, well, my kid doesn't do drugs. Well, I hate to tell you, but there's a lot of kids smoking marijuana. There's a lot of kids that elevate, and you think your kid doesn't do heroin. Heroin is $6 a bag. They can get it cheaper than they can go to McDonald's and get a hamburger. We are in the midst of a heroin epidemic. There's going to be a whole plethora of bills coming up in this next session dealing with substance abuse, but specifically I want to target substance abuse, especially among middle and high school students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend who is helping me with all the pieces of legislation on substance abuse. Ms. Heather Hayes. Thank you very much.